until we're together. One promise I'm keeping, tonight and forever. I'll never turn, I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end. I'll never turn, I'll never bend. I'm with you now until the end.
Good evening, welcome to Conspiracy Cafe. I'm your host George Freund. We're with you now, we're with you to the end. We always hope the end will be a long, long way off, but the New World Order is making plans and putting them into place. Tanks are massing on the Turkish-Syrian border. The economy is heading for the cliff, just ready to fall into the dust as the leaders of the European Union get together to work out their so-called plan or answer to the debt crisis of being fools, boobs, morons, and idiots. They just can't comprehend that the problem is the debt. That's the crisis. And by tacking on new debts or different debts or playing musical chairs with the debts doesn't solve the problem, as we'll get into in fine detail later in the show. It was just an awesome week. It always is an awesome week as we see what goes on in the world, and that's why it's so important to have alternative shows like this. We really appreciate ThatChannel for hosting this show, and we really appreciate you for coming in to watch and listen to this show as you use it on our podcaster or watch it live in video, because this is the point of the sword. This is where we make a difference. This is where we tell you the things the New World Order doesn't want you to know. No one else has the courage to do a lot of this stuff, and that's just a fact. One of the little bonuses, I guess, is, you know, we went to this conspiracy fest here in Toronto, where we had, you know, some of the big hitters, Michael Cremo and George Norrie, sitting on the stage. We compliment Conspiracy Culture Bookstore for giving us a free ticket so we could go with my colleague James Harp and partake in some of the things. This is our guest Stanton Friedman that we had last week on the UFO show. He was there, and fortunately, I got to be interviewed by Sun TV. Not that they would play anything I have to say on Sun TV, but at least we told them that corporate media isn't covering a lot of the important stories that need to be covered. Stories like Russia declaring or threatening to declare nuclear war or a nuclear first strike on NATO a few times. Things of that nature, things that could be important and go bump in the night. I'm sure that tape was burned. There's my colleague James Harp outside a little pose vehicle that was at the site, and myself, so we had a little fun playing around before we got inside. It was at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre. There's the lineup outside ready to get in, and people waiting in the receiving line to see the stars, of course, which weren't me and James primarily, but George Norrie, who put in a very hard night with many long hours and had the decency to hang around and meet all the people that wanted to see him, and that's quite a testament to Mr. Norrie. Unfortunately, we do run into roadblocks a lot of the time on information and news, and that's why this is the point of the sword, because I could tell him face to face about some of the things that are going to come, especially with the Olympics and the potential for terrorist attacks, and the fact that the Google Doodles are code. And we see that as we get into this piece for this evening, that we have not just technical intelligence where we break their code and get the fine details of how the attack's going to work out. Alex Jones has put up a piece on his show with human intelligence where someone infiltrated the security company that's going to be pretty much responsible for the Olympics, saying there's a lot of bad news there. So we're getting it from two sources. We could say one, maybe it's just only one source, maybe it's off, but the Google codes have generally been very, very specific and very, very correct. And the reason I have a great deal of confidence in this one is the fact that it is so specific. So everybody saw the Alan Turing code as it came up. Most people haven't got the slightest idea what these things are and what they represent, aside from being at best parlor games. This was a working code where you actually push buttons and make the numbers come up on the screen. And when you got the sequences right, of course, it would spell the word Google. So we have a video attached to this blog at conspiracy-cafe.com, so you can watch how the numbers are arrived at by someone who's very adept at this. And with each sequence of numbers in zeros and ones, I took the step of putting them together with the letter in sequence. So when you got the number that made the G, I put it with G. This is Alan Turing. He's the man who won World War II, basically, by breaking the German codes. That was the Enigma codes. It was, you know, just stuff we never learned in school. The most important part, probably saved many lives and worked very well with the Allies. This is the Enigma coding machine, which introduced encryption code to a very high level to the older pre-computer codes. And this allowed the Germans to think that they were talking invincibly to their confreres, when in fact the Allies were reading all their mail. And then, of course, Mr. Turing was just like Dr. Kelly. He's one of those men who just died. You work for the British intelligence, everything's fine. Then they come out with some big homosexual scandal to try to say he broke laws pertaining to homosexual sex, and that he lost his security clearance. He was charged and convicted, forced to take these castration-type drugs to reduce his sex drive, which in fact were really female hormones that forced him to grow breasts and things like that, I hear. But ultimately, he was arkancided. He died June 7th, 1954, seemingly suicide, poison cyanide. And while he was using cyanide as an experiment, he was just not one of those people who was going to commit suicide. He was happy, jovial, at the top of his game, and you know, had some sort of romantic liaison planned and was very chipper with his friends. It just didn't seem possible that he would do that. They said there was a half-eaten apple beside his bed, and because this apple was beside his bed, it meant he ate half of it and he died. But it was just his practice and his routine to only eat half an apple and leave the rest. So there was nothing unusual about that. The apple was never tested to see if it did have cyanide on it. Not that that would be important in a coroner's inquest or anything, because this was all made up by the intelligence services, probably right at the very beginning, because they murdered this man because he knew too much. Maybe not specifically knew, but he knew how to read all these German codes. And one of the things that I'm most concerned about is most of the Enigma codes, Ultra as it was also called, were never decoded. Because the war was over, we won. So there was reams and reams and reams and reams of stuff that was never analyzed. He had the ability, maybe he even used the ability to read some things. And a lot of the things towards the end of the war would be the building of the Fourth Reich, where the stolen Reichsbank loot goes, where intelligence operations move to. This is the start of the Galen organization, the start of the boys from Brazil, the start of the infiltration of the West by former Nazis. I guess you're never a former Nazis, but from defeated Nazis trying to rebuild their empire. And maybe he came across and knew just a little too much, so he was arkancided and taken out of the game. That's just my supposition, but I think it's pretty much close bang on. Because at that time in the early 50s there was a major arrest. Goebbels' #1 assistant was arrested by British police, held in custody, released to Germany, given a trial, and released without charges. These guys had metric tons of written material about how they were going to infiltrate and take over the West. Of course, why would that be important? Outside of a few books that I was able to collect in my life, I guess not too many people are aware of that. The individual involved was Werner Naumann, and he's eulogized in our blog here. You can search for his name. Just Werner would probably be good enough. Naumann, N-A-U-M-A-N, and you'll see the plan that he came up with to take over the West. And maybe this poor fellow came across it. But that, you know, a little bit of that background is important for understanding this fine chap. Because basically what we have with these intelligence services is just a revolving door of them, you know, getting into government and corporations, married to each other, bribing, cajoling, taking over what we were thought to believe is a free democratic society, and in fact it is not. So when we activate the G in the Google Doodle, the number sequence is 10011. So I just assumed that that would mean G3, adding up the 3 ones. So you take the ball and you run with it. You can go back to my face now because that picture's redundant for the explanation. And then I find when I search G3, I come out that it's one of those private CIA companies, headquartered in London on George Street. You're going like, okay, that's not bad for my first hit with the ball. There's my supposition. So I find this company, G3, it's an independent strategic advisory firm. It's been implicated in the Sri Lankan War with a British politician when they were the bad guys and the Brits were supposed to be the good guys. It's chaired by President Reagan's former Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, Chester Crocker. It's funded by a company called C5 Capital, which counts Lieutenant General Sir Graham Lamb, former Director of UK Special Forces, among its employees. That's not a bad, you know, let's hit that ball right out of the ballpark with the first one. And then the next number we get is, to get the O activated, is 00011. So we get O2. And what could O2 possibly mean in London? Well, of course, it's the Millennium Dome. Well, the Millennium Dome could be a #1 target for this New World Order plot at the Olympics. So now 2 pitches, 2 out of the ballpark hits. Very, very good. This is doubled, of course, because there's 2 O's and 2 G's in Google. And then when we do the L, to activate the L, the number sequence was 01001. So again, L2. Just punch L2 into the Google search engine, right away you get level 2 at the London Stock Exchange. A very popular hit. No pun intended. So what would this capital company be doing at the London Stock Exchange? If something's going to happen in London, which is highly likely the way things are shaping up right now, these people could short sell and profit from all sorts of companies that they know are going to take a hit, either to be knocked down and short sell them, or companies that will profit from a disaster of this magnitude. Not too bad. So 3 hits out of the ballpark. And then the final letter, E, the number sequence was 10000. E1. E1 is the postal code for London. So that's telling us the target zone. London, Millennium Dome, this private security company, an investment company, could very well be involved. And then something told me to look further, so I did look further. And then I went to C5 Capital's website and captured this image off their website in case they change it or it disappears, with all these 1s and 0s. This is exactly like the Google Doodle at the start. All the 1s and 0s. So it's almost showing you clearly and precisely that you've arrived at the proper solution. C5 Capital is our company. C5 Capital, General Lamb, and potentially all his special forces in hiding will be doing a job here at E1 London. And then Mr. Turing, of course, was an accomplished athlete. If he competed in the Olympics in his day, his times were good enough to win him the silver medal. So there's almost like a little hidden reference to the fact that the Olympics, the Olympics, the Olympics, the Olympics are hot on the seat. And Google, being the military-industrial complex, is telling its faithful what the game plan is. And they thought they did it in such a cute way that no one would ever find out. So this is from Alex Jones's work, where he has this whistleblower, so they say, a man who infiltrated the security company that's going to be doing the London Olympics. It's one of the biggest security companies in the world, G4S Group 4 Securicor. For people who've been on the website and saw the shootout with the bank guards and the local constabulary, that's Group 4 Securicor as well. Very, very unusual now that we can say these guards were in some sort of firefight with the police for some reason and some terrible thing happened. This is the company. Securicor was the company that guarded the shipments on the train for the Great Train Robbery. They're all over the place. Securicor and some of its subsidiaries or companies with other names were responsible for security with Dulles Airport, the World Trade Center. We have people that were just, you know, right in on the front lines. I've worked for variations of these companies. It's probably why I'm not working there anymore. They gave me the axe long before 9/11, where I was set up and taken out the door. But that's okay, I morph. And I morphed into radio and just being the voice to millions across talk radio circuits during probably one of the most important times in our history, when we were being forced into a police state. So I look at it as God's providence that He moved me, taught me what I needed to know, and gave me a voice to speak to millions of people on all different radio stations all over the world, mostly in Southern Ontario, of course, but shortwave goes global and around the world. To get me on Alex Jones's show, the Power Hour, almost every AM station that does good talk radio in Southern Ontario, just to take on these propagandists who are feeding us all this BS, and not being afraid that there's only one of me or a very small group and 99.999% of public opinion against me. Because slowly, as we marched along, our opinions became more and more correct and their opinions completely indefensible. And I just laughed almost sometimes when they would try to shoot me down over various aspects of things that I brought up about 9/11. And I'd say, look, I got this from the Sunday New York Times, the flagship paper of the United States home base, the target city. They said this on the front page. It's news. Why can't we say it somewhere else? Why can't we go over the factoids? Talk about the engineers for Boeing saying that the planes couldn't fly that fast low to the ground. Why can't we talk about the structural integrity of the steel based on engineers' reports that ended up in the New York Times? That's news. Why do we only have to get propaganda? Because that's what they're selling us. They're selling us a self-defeating story that entraps us, imprisons us, and ruins us. So this gentleman didn't give his name, probably a wise move. He was given a pseudonym, so it really doesn't matter. But he got into the training system. He was hired. He said they didn't do proper background checks. They didn't vet his references. Not a good sign for the Olympics. And then he came up with a story that he said they have plans for an evacuation of London, and they have 200,000 casket linings standing by. These caskets are these big suckers, probably like we saw on various alternative media sites being shipped around the United States, that hold 4 bodies. He went to people he knew in the media, specifically Channel 4 News Home Affairs correspondent Andy Davies, to talk about this. And he was rebuffed and told that there was a blackout, that this would not get on any mainstream media outlet. Not that we haven't seen things like that before. So he said he merely had to fill out an application to get this job. He did 2 days of training. He was asked to be a terrorist in a final training where he would smuggle in a knife, a gun, or an improvised explosive device. And on all 3 occasions in this training, he got through the metal detector and the screening processes they were using. So he's batting 0. We were batting 1,000. He witnessed G4S members doing drug deals while training in classics. The shooter at the University of Alberta openly boasted that he used narcotics. Taking surveillance photos on cell phones in supposedly secure areas was happening. And the poorly qualified staff were hired, and many of them couldn't speak English. As if that would be important. He said there was a large contingent of soldiers being brought into London for the games, a lot of UN troops being posted in and around London, including American and German troops. Unauthorized personnel were being handed Group 4 Securicor G4S uniforms, and that a lot of uniforms had been stolen. Earthquake level material. And then he said there was a 2-hour lecture about the evacuation of London, that the number of troops could be in the neighborhood of 100,000. Then he reiterates about the 200,000 temporary coffins again. Predator drones would be circling London ready for terror attacks. It was also said that they were forced to watch a video of a terror drone attack on people in Afghanistan, so I guess you get used to the blood. He said G4S leaders saw the public as the scum of the earth, told their employees that the police had no authority over them. One of the leaders told him that an event after the Olympics would be a defining moment for London, but when pressed, refused to divulge what she meant. And then G4S fired a data input clerk who was also a whistleblower, talking about some of the lax security and hiring processes going on with this company specifically for the Olympics. So there, if this man is correct and true, we have human intelligence on the inside telling us exactly what we decrypted in the Google message at the same time. So usually with something too independent, completely independent, because I don't know that guy, and I can pretty much be rest assured that they don't know me. So we have two independent sources coming up with the same answer for the same problem, and that gives it a very high reliability, I think, in my experience. And then we just know that these are Illuminati ritualistic killers, and that's just their way of doing things on a good day. So part of the problem, of course, is he says he went to this media, Channel 4, to explain his part. And just like I showed you my picture being interviewed by Sun Media, I told this reporter, who was just absolutely shocked about some of the stories that aren't allowed to be reported, and told him too that I break the Google codes, probably one of the few, if only, people on the planet Earth that do this, that can read these things, at least someone outside of the loop. And the same thing, the deaf ear comes out. The sad part is, while I was at this reception with George Norrie, I told him personally too that I can do this. I gave my name and phone number and email address to his producer, Tom. And I got the same cold response. They're not interested in knowing. And then you have to get a little bit worried to say, well, you know, who out there really represents the people? I know a lot of the people I've done media with, like James Harp, who comes on this show from time to time, my good buddy Tim, who's doing a show on Orion Network in the States. I know they speak from the heart and try to do the best they can to reveal the truths, and they're very interested in finding the truths, and when they see those truths, they'll swim through vast seas and stormy waves to get to the other side to show you these truths. But most everybody else in the driver's seat puts up roadblocks so that no one can ever find these things out, and you have to ask why. So when these events come to pass, if they do, and they may highly likely come to pass, we'll have to pay a terrible, terrible price for this. All the suckers who are lined up to go to London for these stupid Olympics, you know, well, at least they'll have a box to put them in. 200,000 of them. It's a very, very strange world we live in. So I had some older material from way back in the beginning of 9/11 about these security companies and what contracts they had, what places they worked in, but just luckily there was a little article that just happened to tag along with me, the story of the CIA assassination squad, Operation 40, talking about the JFK assassination, the shot at Reagan, 9/11, but they mentioned indirectly a little bit about these companies. Another company, Securicom, Stratosec, 2 Bush members on the board, Marvin Bush and Wirt Walker III, but in various guises, other companies as well, had contracts for this security in various key locations and were working for the other side so that they could open the door, let someone in. We covered the Vancouver Olympics very, very intimately. We were probably the only place to take the tip that someone gave me. See, there's the difference. Some guy Writes me, never heard of them before in my life. And he says they're smuggling a nuclear weapon or something like it into the Vancouver Olympics. And I go, whew, that's a hot one. But I listen, and I did research, and I checked things out, and I go, you know, I can't disprove this guy. It's so good. This could be real. And if it's real, it has to be reported. Everybody else just runs for the exit. Nobody wants to hear it. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to do anything about it. So the ship he reported canceled its contracts at the last minute for the Olympics. The Olympics, the best contract they'll probably ever have for that ship. And left everybody stranded. They were supposed to be a floating hotel. Well, that tells me there's a lot of significance to what the man had to say. He said the crew was disembarked from the ship, taken away for a couple of days, put up in a hotel, and a strange, suspicious package, or large crate actually, was put on the ship. And then the ship was sailing to Victoria, British Columbia, to go in a dry dock to get its barnacle scraped. Okay, I'm going to give up a multi-million-dollar contract to be a floating hotel to go in a dry dock to get my barnacle scraped. That just doesn't make sense. So that gives a lot of credibility to that tip, and we followed that through the whole Olympics. Because you could go be the floating hotel, collect the big pile of money you're going to get, and the other part is they lost a lot of money because people sued them for breaking their contracts. So they were out a ton of dough over that. So after you collect all your money, then you go in a dry dock, it's right next door, and get your barnacle scraped. It's like, you know, I'm on my way to get my oil changed in a car, and there's a guy hitchhiking at the side of the road beside a big bank tower. I gave you 10 grand to take me to the airport. I got to get there now. I was going to change my oil, but you know what? I think I'll do it tomorrow. Hop in, buddy. Only makes sense. And I think we made a lot of sense in that one. And that's the difference, I guess, between this show, The Point of the Sword, and all the rest. Nobody else would cover it. Then at the very end, after the Olympics was over, I just started searching for pictures around the dry dock. And I found a picture of my cruise ship. And on the dock was a giant crate just sitting there. Some tourist took a picture of it and posted it online. And then I always had to wonder, was that the crate that my tipster told me about? We also talked about the man who got into the, you know, the big Pacific Coliseum and got close to the vice president within steps. I was arrested by 2 alert police officers. Guy's like 6 steps from the vice president. Totally nutso. How did he get in? Because it was probably like one of those security companies ringing the building, and they had one of their operatives or a stolen uniform on a guy. And he just opens the door and he lets him in. Just like that. It's that easy. One of the other big stories that's coming out of Europe that's very disconcerting about this, criminals from Eastern Europe pose as police officers to target fans in Britain. We also told you about the thousands of IDs that were manufactured for this fraud ring. Very, very, very worrisome stuff. It just establishes a big pattern. One of the other parts of the stories I told Sun TV is, you know, hey, you know, the Russians threatened to nuke us a couple of times. The N-word. First attack, first strike. So I was looking for the older articles that I found, and then I found a newer one, which is even more scary. The newer one was Medvedev, before the G20 meeting at Camp David, was being interviewed saying the same thing. We reserve the right for a nuclear first strike. So that was just recently. They made no bones about it. Of course, that's not news. And then when you open up your email, sometimes you get the BS news that goes along with it. So one of them said, we're going to let the Russians fly an airplane over Canada to take pictures. Well, that sounds so innocent. If you're 5 years old, military planes like that don't take tourist pictures. Okay? What they do is they take targeting pictures. Target. That one's coming right through your nose. That's what they're doing. It's not a tourist flight. They say they're using this treaty on open skies, which we signed, stupidly enough. But in those days, we were trying to make friends and make peace. So we already had all kinds of nuclear weapons pointed at each other, and we were ready to push the button and kill each other. So open skies didn't mean too much because we had satellites looking down everybody's nostrils anyway. So there was really nothing to lose and everything to gain. Now the times have changed. Nobody's been interested in open skies. But all of a sudden, the country that keeps using the N-word for nuclear first strike because of these radar facilities in Poland wants to have close-up pictures of all our infrastructure. And we let them, because our leaders are so stupid, they probably don't even know what Medvedev said, and they probably don't even know what General Makarov said, because they're too busy either pillaging from the treasury, getting drunk with all kinds of whores and babes, like Charlie Wilson in Charlie Wilson's War. You're in the hot tub, and by some miracle he's looking up at the TV screen to see, you know, hey, there's something important up there. And all the bimbos and babes all around him just don't count anymore. Well, I don't think we have any leaders that are going to take that lightning strike. So this plane is going to fly across Canada for 3 days and take all these pictures and retarget. The Russians have their new GPS system. It's like Glasnost, but it's GLaNOS or something along those lines. So they don't use GPS anymore. So when the American satellites are shot down, they don't have to worry about their targeting. It'll be bang on. Part of the process here in Toronto, for those who care, back in the day when they had the Day After movie play, one of the TV shows, series or whatever, put on the Russian ambassador. And he openly admitted that there were 4 nuclear weapons targeted for Toronto. So it doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out what the primary targets would be. Of course, our big international airport, Pearson International Airport, Downsview Air Force Base, got to be the top 2. And then you have to have something take out the downtown core, or maybe just drop it on the island airport, and that'll do the rest. It's just a short hop, skip, and a jump to the downtown core from there. And that wipes out your 3 major airports, and then you got 1 bonus one. And Pearson International is such a tough target, such an important primary target, you'd probably double tap it, drop 2, just in case. We'd probably even let them park their planes there as they're traversing across. So that's where I penned this blog, Red Dawn, based on the movie Red Dawn, which is going to be remade, but the old one was about a Soviet invasion of Russia. That is a cult classic film, something you got to get. I couldn't get a pirate copy or anything to put on the website or display because of copyright things. There's only little short snippets here or there, but if you can find that puppy, the original Red Dawn, that is something to watch, just to let you know what it's like to live in hostile territory, what it's like to be a partisan, what it's like to be put in the concentration camp and all that sort of thing, and how you deal with the future. It's being remade now. This time it's supposed to be a North Korean invasion, which I find highly unlikely, but who knows. And then of course I love Forrest Gump, and this is what I look at for our leaders. Mama always said, stupid is as stupid does. And you can't get any more stupid than letting the Russians overfly with this nice big Tu-154M surveillance aircraft to target, not take pictures, to target you. And then of course, as the day approaches, you know, everything's starting to happen around Syria. Syria is a very important city biblically because it's Damascus that disappears in the fireball. This is an artist's rendition of that happening. And behold, Damascus will cease from being a city, and it will be a ruinous heap, the prophet Isaiah, chapter 17, verse 1. That's why this standoff between Russia and NATO and Turkey, which is part of NATO and Syria, is just so damn important. But the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night, in which the heavens shall pass away with a great noise. Sure, a nuclear weapon makes a lot of noise. And the elements shall melt with fervent heat. I think that has the capability of doing that too. The earth also, and the works that are therein shall be burned up. 2 Peter 3:10. There's no mistake about that kind of stuff. I've had that feeling from the moment I ever read things like that. Go, Daniel, for the matters are obscured and sealed until the end. They will be elucidated and clarified and refined by many people. The wicked will act wickedly, and none of the wicked will understand, but the wise will understand. Daniel 12:9-10. And that was just so important to me. And there's our little picture of the Wolverines. They were the resistance in Red Dawn, and of course that's our Canadian flag there for those who don't know. And we have a motto in this country: we stand on guard for thee. And I ask people, how do you stand on guard for your country? You sit in front of the TV set and drink beer. You watch your various sporting events. You go to all the big festivities. Does anyone stand on guard for this country except a very few small people that I know? But one of the things that I wanted to bring out about the wicked, it just hits you like a sledgehammer when you read it again now. And none of the wicked will understand. Remember how many times you try to explain something to somebody and you try to tell them, you know, hey, look, Google puts out this stuff, man. They're doing stuff in code. It's telling us what the future's going to be, like apocalyptic, terror attacks, all this sort of thing. And you just got the blank look. Tell them the economy's crashing, things are going downhill, this is going to happen, there's going to be bank failures, there's going to be runs on the bank, and you get the deer in the headlight looks again. They can't understand. Well, this tells us why they don't understand. They're wicked. There's your discerning mark to see on which side of the fence people are on. If they can't understand it, God told us they're wicked. And maybe they're also acting in wicked ways by restricting media access or not telling stories or putting out propaganda pieces or complete lies. But the wise will understand. And I guess that's where I have to say I'm duly blessed, because you can't be here taking in something like this unless you're very, very wise. The wicked just don't understand. There's no way they could comprehend this. Then, of course, one of our good fans sends us this executive order from the President of the United States. Not that he matters, worth a bit of anything. I called it Red Dawn Part 2, seizing the assets of the Federation, Russian Federation that is, by executive order. And we can put that on the screen there so people can see what I'm talking about on the website, conspiracy-cafe.com. This is a letter from the President of the United States and a copy of his executive order, written word for word, copied directly from the White House website. It declares an international or a national emergency and invokes the International Emergency Economic Powers Act and rehashes a previous executive order 13159. Okay, you can go back to my mug now. I got my nice picture of the White House. And basically what the United States is doing is seizing the assets that the Russians used for this treaty they had about heavily enriched uranium. So we're supposed to take the highly enriched uranium and reduce it to low enriched uranium. And Russia's supposed to be paid in either cash or a trade-off for other nuclear elements. But what the President is doing is he's seizing the assets. So part of the problem is, why is he worried all of a sudden? Because the Russians broke the treaty now and they're not sending in their highly enriched uranium to be converted into low enriched uranium? Because this is highly fissile material and it's stuff that can be used to make nuclear weapons. So are the Russians going on a massive bomb building spree? And that's why they brought this out? Of course, no one will ever tell us, but if that's the case, then we can look at this picture here and say, yes, it's time to duck and cover. Bert the Turtle from the old civil defense commercials telling us that, you know, it's almost time to kiss your ass goodbye, because this is going to come to a crux at one time or another. And, you know, whether that's days, weeks, or months, it's difficult to say, but we are heading for a very, very interesting time. It won't be boring. Syrian forces shot down a Turkish jet. Alex Jones says that's some sort of provocation. Perhaps he's right. But this jet flew over Syrian space, just playing cat and mouse. You can do that at Mach 2 point whatever. And I guess they do it all the time, and nobody really cares, but this time they cared. They shot down the plane. This is very important because, of course, Turkey is part of NATO. NATO is in a big defense pact with many other countries, including Canada and the United States, our countries, that we have to come to their aid if they're attacked. Turkey's moving massive forces to the Syrian border, tanks, anti-aircraft batteries, and a substantial amount of troops. And they say their rules of engagement have changed so that if they see any Syrian soldiers approaching the border, they will interpret that as a hostile act and open fire. The Russians are in Syria at the Tartus naval base as advisors, and the Russians are shipping in a lot of material. The Russian flagged bulk cargo vessel Professor Katzman docked at the Syrian port to deliver weapons to the Assad regime. They have several warships there, large landing ships with Marines on board. So when we start shooting at Syria, what will happen if we hit a few Ruskies? They may start shooting back. So now NATO is committed to get involved in this, and some of the cooperative zone nations that support Russia may get involved in this, but they probably don't really need them. But Iran, Syria, and Russia are going to give you a hell of a heartburn if this got out of the box. Russia, China, and Iran staged the biggest Mideast training maneuvers they ever have. 90,000 personnel, 400 airplanes, 900 tanks. So they're taking things very, very seriously. So when you get into a war as well, involving China in the equation as allies to Iran and Russia, the Bible prophecy of the 200 million man army coming from the east, coming to the Middle East, isn't so outlandish anymore. They have more than enough people. The Obama war machine announces the invasion of Syria. So they've made plans so that they can invade Syria. So whether this is provocation or not, or however, but sooner or later, a time may come when this will happen. The British government has been taking away insurance from ships going to the Middle East, like Russian ships delivering arms to try to enforce these weapons embargoes. President Putin visited Israel, and I guess he talked Turkey with their leaders, no pun intended. Maybe he was shaking his fist to say, see, I launched that missile over you a couple of weeks ago. How did you like it? You want some more? Who knows what they talk about? They never tell us. Everything we get is lies. Russia is definitely not happy about this nuclear deal with Iran. We had an election in Egypt. We have an Islamic awakening, as it's described. Mohammed Morsi comes in. He wins his election. And then, of course, what happens? The military takes over. Well, they already were in charge, but what they did is they had an emergency meeting and issued a constitutional decree reducing the power of the president. So he'll have no control over the military's budget or its leadership. And he will not be authorized to declare war without the consent of the ruling generals, who are probably all CIA vassals. The military will name a group of Egyptians to draft a new constitution. And I guess if they don't do a good job, they'll just be shot. It'll be subject to a public referendum, so they say. There'll be a new parliamentary election to replace the Islamist-dominated lower house that was elected the previous election. So your vote didn't add up to much, because they're worried about the so-called Muslim Brotherhood. But I guess that's almost not as bad as Chile, as we see in the video that we have on our website about the evils of the American empire. Leon Panetta, Defense Secretary, was quite happy to call Field Marshal Mohammed Hussein Tantawi and talk about the transition to democracy. It doesn't matter who you vote for. If we don't approve of them, we wipe them out. The United States gives Egypt $1.3 billion in military aid. So we just see how the game is fixed. The country's top judges who were appointed by Mubarak before issued the ruling to dissolve the parliament. And that's one of the big reasons where you see how the Constitution is changed by these generals. It's one of the biggest arguments I've always had with atheists about whether or not we should have God in the Constitution. If your Constitution comes from God, only God can take it away. So if you don't believe in God, then there's nothing on this earth that can take it away. If there is no God, then whoever gave you the Constitution, the Generalissimo, the dictator, whatever gave it to you, can take it away and rewrite it and tear it up. That's why it's far more effective to have your rights coming from the supreme being of the universe, God. Very simple. The Taliban block vaccinations in Pakistan. That's probably one of the small good pieces of news. So a Taliban sect who was concerned about the drone bombing said, stop bombing, or we're not going to give these polio vaccinations to our children. Good deal, because they're not going to stop bombing, and 161,000 children aren't going to get whatever poison dose is in those vaccinations. And I guess in keeping with a little bit of our UFO stuff from last week, another area where nobody really wanted to talk about this was this thing that they found at the bottom of the Baltic, this dome, this unusual thing. We didn't really have time to get into it too much with Stanton. I did bring it to his attention in an email form, and I didn't get a reply, so that's probably one of these other things we're not supposed to know about. So let's start this video here about what was at the bottom of the Baltic.
Expressen kan idag publicera exklusiva bilder från det första dyket vid det som kallas Östersjömysteriet. Det var meningen att dykare skulle få svar vad den oidentifierbara ringen på havsbotten i Östersjön var för något, men det blev precis tvärtom. Professionella dykare undersökte materialet och hittade något som de beskriver som svarta, nästan förkolnade bitar. Och dessutom hittades ett oförklarligt hål som går rätt igenom stenarna som utgör cirkeln.
Vi försökte hitta svar, det var därför vi gick ner. Men vi fick bara ännu flera frågor. Sen så simmade vi vidare och hittade ytterligare några sådana här stencirklar, så kallar det, och där stenarna gick i formation. Vid senare dykningar så gick vi ner med släggan, slog bort de här bitarna, och då var de svarta, nästan förkolnade liksom stenbitarna. Och det har vi tagit upp och lämnat till geologer, så det vet inte vi så mycket om. Men det kändes som förkolnad sten på något sätt. Vi ser också det sista vi gör på sista dyket, då ser vi ett hål som är 1,5 gånger 2,5 decimeter ungefär. Och som går rätt in i det här objektet på botten som utgör den här cirkeln. Vad det hålet leder vet vi inte, för det har vi ännu inte kunnat kontrollera. Så det tror väl framtida dykningar utvisa.
Det var den 11 juni förra året som dykargruppen gjorde det som kan vara en sensationell upptäckt. Av en slump upptäcktes den stora runda formationen på deras skannerskärmar när de letade efter vrak. Och trots att några av Sveriges främsta forskare inom marinarkeologi studerat materialet har ingen kunnat svara på vad som faktiskt finns på havsbotten. Nyheten om det mystiska fyndet spred sig som en löpeld och bland annat rapporterade amerikanska CNN om det som kom att kallas Östersjömysteriet. Och Stefan Hågeborn, som har över 20 års erfarenhet av undervattensfotografi och dykning, berättar för Expressen att han aldrig sett något liknande.
Nej, absolut aldrig. Jag dyker kanske en 300 dyk om året. Jag har gjort det här i 20 år nu. Och det är min huvudsakliga sysselsättning att dyka och utbilda dykare. Men nej, skulle jag vilja säga aldrig. Inte på land, inte under vattnet. Det är bara förbryllar både mig och alla andra på den här båten.
Okay, so this is definitely going to be one you'll want to watch on the video portion, unless your Swedish is very good. One of the other ones that goes with it is this video, Mysterious Baltic Sea Object Raises More Questions, where a lot of the equipment these people were using shorted out.
Investigating the mysterious object they discovered in the Baltic Sea. The expedition was supposed to provide answers, but instead yielded yet more questions. It has also broadened the minds of those involved.
Well, we have experienced things that I really couldn't imagine, because I have been the team's biggest skeptic. I was kind of prepared of finding just a stone. For me, it has been an amazing experience, I must say.
The team were completely dwarfed by the mysterious object, which is about 60 meters in diameter and lying almost 80 meters down on the bottom of the Baltic Sea. There are visible formations on top of the object which are set at a 90-degree angle and look like passageways or walls, as well as something that looks like it could be a staircase. The divers also found a hole about 25 centimeters in diameter, though it is not yet known where it leads. In addition, they found circular forms of small rocks that appear to have been placed like a pearl necklace. Geologists who follow the work haven't been able to explain what it is yet. Alongside the mystery, there were also many difficulties.
We looked at our dive computer, and it said -1 degree. That's pretty cold for a dive, and it should really be impossible to have that cold water, because it actually turns into ice at 0 degrees. But that could be explained by the movement of the water.
Also, some strange phenomenon occurred. A main objective of the dive was to film the object, and yet the camera stopped working when they approached the object.
Why isn't anything working, anything electrical? And the satellite phone we have as well stopped working when we were above the object. And when we got away for about 200 meters, it turned on again. And when we got back over the object, it didn't work. So that's kind of strange as well.
Mr. Hågeborn says he has never experienced anything like this during his 20 years as a professional diver. Dennis Åsberg of the Ocean X team is 100% sure after the first expedition that they have found something quite unusual.
Ja, så jag är 100% övertygad.
I'm 100% convinced and confident that we have found something that is very, very, very unique. Then, if it is a meteorite or an asteroid or a volcano, or a base from, say, a U-boat from the Cold War which has been manufactured and placed there, yes. Or if it is a UFO, well, honestly, it has to be something.
Ja, alltså jag är helt ärligt, någonting är det.
Lab results will be forthcoming, and the second expedition is already planned to depart in 2 weeks. Ocean X team hope that a geology specialist will join the next expedition. Cecilia Svensson, NTD News, Stockholm, Sweden.
So isn't that absolutely amazing? It just seems sometimes we bring these things up, you know, the boys in the suits don't want to talk about them too much. I know I did hear Stanton talk at this George Norrie expose and talk about the fact that he spoke with Admiral Byrd's pilot, and Admiral Byrd's pilot denied that there were ever anything found in Antarctica. And I was, you know, no one asked him about it, it just came out kind of cold turkey, and I was just kind of impressed, like, you know, we know they lie to us, about everything, why would they tell us the truth about that? If Admiral Byrd said something happened, and I think they killed him. James Forrestal, the Secretary of the Navy at the time, died mysteriously as well. So I think we got two good opinions here that we're dealing with something very, very bizarre. So to say flat out that Admiral Byrd's pilot said nothing happened seems a little out of context with reality of what they tell us, lies. So I sent him some stills from shows we did before about New Schwabenland with the German film from 1938 showing how they had blueprints to make Base 211 in Antarctica. How they were going to put 5,000 people underground down there. He never answered me back. So we just see, you know, the little alarm bell going off to say, well, you know, why the cold shoulder? Do you think it's true or not? Why can't we have an opinion? I guess we're not allowed to have opinions with the New World Order. But with Europe, we're heading for some opinions. Stephen Quayle's already reported that the euro collapsed and it's just being held up by strings. Can't disagree with them in any way, shape, or form. They would never tell us much. He said the Spain bailout happened by stealth. The bank holidays spilling over to Spain, Portugal, and France. Well, we knew that. The flight to safe harbor is now the UK, not. And then the United States, as we showed you in our graphics. You're still on the Titanic if you're all on these things. Yeah, the water's in your cabin, 3 decks below. There's no sense going up on the deck and running to the rear. The whole ship's going down. There is no safe haven in fiat currency. Of course, he mentions in his article the main players have moved to gold. Gold is starting to decline a little bit right now because there's a lot of fighting for your lives at the front lines, where people are pulling money out of the gold, probably maybe to support other assets, or they're short selling it to try to make a quick buck. But make no mistake about it, that's probably about the only safe haven you're going to get into, is because when this collapse, when the sinking happens, paper currency can go to zero, gold can go to infinity. And they probably won't be able to lie about it for much longer. There's some other aspects to gold I'll get into for the next show that are very, very important. Alex Jones has one posted on his website today. But once this derivative bubble bursts, he uses the same word I have, maybe he's watched the show too, we're going to go through the parabolic high velocity crash. And we showed you on our blog, you look up the parabolic crash scenario, where this happens, it implodes so quickly, we'll never know we even crossed the threshold until we're already on the other side. It can be that fast, and the dollar will be exposed as worthless. The Russian economy will suffer greatly in the euro collapse. The Russians are blaming the entire world and the entire Western banking system for the recent decline to the ruble. They're probably going to be really mad when the rest happens. And they got a lot of fissile material left over to shoot in our general direction, and nice targeting pictures all over Canada to make sure we don't miss. Hate to see some poor slob in a remote area get nuked when we can take out large cities and military bases here in Canada. So, if you're on summer holidays, you're looking at Halifax or maybe Esquimalt or something like that, have a good look and say goodbye. North Bay, we got our NORAD facility up there from the good old days. It's probably not going to exist anymore either. So you might have the last surviving shots of some of these little tourist meccas. Toronto, well, we're not putting too many bets on you either. But some of these banks, even Deutsche Bank, PNB Paribas, the French banking giant, will take a massive hit in this derivative thing. So, estimates go as high as $125 trillion. This is a solvency crisis, not a liquidity crisis. The banks are not solvent. There'll come a time when, the Chinese will back their yuan with gold. They've been buying lots of gold. Dumping US T-bills or treasury bonds will be a major event. They haven't been at the bond auctions in some time. The banking system with BRICS, Morgan Stanley, is the next Lehman Brothers due to Facebook and Euro exposure. That's what Stephen Quayle had to say, and I can't disagree with him in any way, shape, or form. Christine Lagarde, our really nice chic lady who likes to dress up, as we've talked about and shown you her pictures, says the euro has less than 3 months to go. And I can't disagree with her on that either. And then in the article that came with it, it said sovereign debt becomes detrimental to economic growth on average when the ratio surpasses 90%. Any kind of debt is detrimental to economic growth. That's why I don't understand a lot of what these people took in school. I guess, you know, they like the big, the fast, whatever, but I don't know, when they taught me about that, the thing I liked best was the balanced budget multiplier. If you have a balanced budget, it has a multiplying effect on the economy because you don't have this interest around your neck choking you all the time. So the best way to be is to have a balanced budget, not to borrow on tomorrow's promises, not to give these turkeys the gold card. Yeah, see, it started out easy. I would just borrow 5% or 10%. No big deal. But then they get greedy, and it's more borrowed dreams, more borrowed dreams. You can't live on borrowed dreams. It just doesn't work. So they call this now the perfect storm. It's not that perfect because primarily the taxpayers are on the hook for this perfect storm when that comes to pass. Bank holidays. In France, the Banque Postale stopped the outgoing wires due to a technical glitch, they say, and we'll see more of that as it comes. The Greek elections were supposed to calm all the markets. They did for about an hour. Then they ran out of ouzo and everything went back to normal again. These globalists are very, very dangerous. What they're doing is very, very dangerous. What we have to say is maybe come up with some, you know, good globalist jokes. Why did the globalists cross the road? Well, to take over the world. How many globalists does it take to screw in a light bulb? Well, we have to have a 50 million euro study to find out. That's what they're like. That's what they do. But they do it with our money and our lives. The Greeks were taking massive amounts of money out of the bank daily. You know, estimates well over €1 billion, some as high as 3 billion euros. Higher mortgage rates are coming back as a fear because money lenders have been downgraded by the credit rating agencies. And this was a big one. These were big, major banks. Barclays, Hong Kong, Shanghai Bank of China, Royal Bank of Scotland, Lloyd's Banking Group, forced to raise extra money to pay higher rates of interest because they were downgraded. And then the wooden stake through our heart, Bank of England Governor Sir Mervyn King wrote a blank check, promising to provide them with whatever liquidity they require, given the prospect of turbulence ahead. And turbulence will be ahead. But he wrote them a blank check. That means they're going to hyperinflate the currency if they follow through on that. There's no other option. If they keep printing money, the only thing we can get is hyperinflation, and that's the worst case scenario. That will wipe out the value of all paper dollars. Moody's warned that it is looking at 100 firms in Europe and a handful in the US as well to downgrade their credit ratings. So it's not just the banks. All these places are up to it. UK savers losing about £18 billion thanks to England's monetary experiment. So basically, lower returns because of higher inflation wipe out what people put in the bank. So it doesn't make any sense to have any money at the bank. They're paying peanuts in interest. They put out $325 billion in quantitative easing. They're going to put out £50 billion more in quantitative easing. It's just insane. Part of the insanity is we give them our money that they use to invest in projects to take away our freedoms and our liberties. I was talking to a woman on the weekend, and you know, we just come to the conclusion it's time to pull all our money out of the bank and have runs on the banks and force them to their knees so they can't use this money to enslave us anymore. Because it's the old golden rule. He who has the gold makes the rules. Right now they have our gold, our cash, our money, and they're using that to make all kinds of rules that don't benefit us in any way, shape, or form. If we hold those resources in our own pockets, then they have to jump through the hoops to come to us. That will be a long, arduous battle. But we might as well face it now so that we at least have something in our pockets when the time comes. This quantitative easing from Britain is supposed to come out in July or August. August is one of the dates where we're supposed to see some activity or action. Maybe we're going to see this attack at the Olympics. They call quantitative easing a stealth tax because it steals the wealth from people saving for their future. Then in another article too, they say it again. The Bank of England and Treasury revealed emergency plans to pump an unlimited amount of money into the economy. That would be the death knell. Pensions are being slashed. In many places, they're taking a 20% cut in Britain under new rules for pensions, if we're even going to see anything like that in the near future. The euro will ride out the Greek election, but it'll get punched out by Spain. So of course the banksters have all their solutions. We need more integration. And I'd say that's probably the worst solution they could come up with. At least they understand some of the weaknesses in it. You cannot do integration without an electoral mandate. And we never get an electoral mandate in these things. We vote them in for something. Maybe we got to make more ice cream. And the next thing you know, we get more globalization. We go, well, that's not what we voted for. Because they don't care. They say without integration, the euro will perish. Who cares? We don't need the euro. What you need are small, more manageable governments. The elite bodies in Brussels play with concepts like integration in denial of their position as elected representatives with an obligation to nurture prosperity. They're only there for one thing. Their globalization, their Europe, their euro is like a religious mantra to them. You mean nothing. Preserving the currency takes precedence over everything else to them because we put them there. The end of the euro will be grisly. Politicians seemingly incapable of telling Europeans what the market is now clearly signaling. Unraveling the euro is the only orderly thing to do, because it's just like you've got a pressure vessel that's about ready to explode. Well, you can turn a knob and let some of the steam off, and it'll make a horrible noise, and you probably won't be able to use it what you were using it from before. But if you don't release the pressure, it's going to explode, and when it explodes, then there's no control. Pieces just fly helter-skelter everywhere. Spanish and Italian bond yields are up, so they can't pay these more normal interest rates. That's what these debt places like Moody's should have been doing in the first place, is raising the rates, lowering their credit ratings a long time ago. So it makes it prohibitive for them to borrow tons and tons of money. So they were rewarding negative behavior. You keep the rates really low for these people, keep giving them AAA credit ratings that they don't deserve, and they keep getting deeper and deeper into this debt trap. If they had done their job, it never would have happened, because they'd have to face reality. I can't go to the bank and borrow $1 million. They're not going to give it to me. There's a reality. But what we see here is nobody seems capable to talk about this on the world stage. And the end will come from pressure of market disruption. They call 4 countdown steps here. There's nothing that the global community can do to help the euro other than giving it more and more money, a bottomless pit. Markets have signaled already today they have little belief in Spain or Italy to repay or resume growth. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. The EU agrees to accelerate its discussion around integration. German control bank says no. German politicians have to back off. Integration is a long-term project requiring this electoral support. The EU decides to throw Greece to the markets through an orderly exit. They remove money from the banks. The EU does nothing on Greece, and then has to stare down at the barrel of Italy becoming unhinged. By this time next week, and this is last week's article, looking at an acceleration of bank runs taking place across Europe. People are taking their money out. It's not just confined to Europeans. People have lost faith in the solvency of banks. And everything they're doing is just a short-term solution. There's nothing to gain to support the EU countries and their high debts. And that's one thing we have to at least give our Prime Minister a little bit of credit. for not giving them any more money, because you're never going to get it back. It's just going down a debt hole you're never going to see. Secret EU document came out showing the first steps to a banking union. The Daily Telegraph published a secret document, eyes only, preparing for the 28th, 29th June European Council in Brussels. These non-papers, it's called the limité text, circulating at top secret level between various countries, not included in the draft. Talk about the financial stability measures and the PEC report on the EMU. The PEC is the President of the European Council, the Economic Monetary Union, and of course they're saying we have to have this globalization, this economic union. Chancellor Angela Merkel warned that there are no miracle solutions to the crisis in the Eurozone. And that's not true. There are. The miracle solution is the states print their own money and stop borrowing, because we have a debt problem. That's the solution, but they can't think of those solutions. And then this is what happened in Ireland when they reverted back to the punt, as we discussed before. This is another version of a news clip for that.
That forced Greece, Portugal and Ireland to seek rescue. But as Eurozone powerhouses try to keep the single currency afloat, one Irish town is banking on the past to turn a profit. RT's Laura Smith reports.
It's a blast from the past, as this customer uses the Irish punt to pay for some everyday purchases in the town of Clonus. Ireland joined the euro from the get-go in 2002, but crisis-hit business owners here have revived their old currency to try and desperately claw some cash back into the community.
Basically, if you bring in punt into us, 20 punt, whatever you spend, or 50 punt, whatever you spend, we will give you the change in Clonus Town vouchers, which you can then go and spend across the road in Super Value or in the Creighton Hotel, or go for a drink up the town. It's a great scheme for the town. It means all the money remains within the town.
As for the euro, here it's been reduced to a novelty item, printed on tissues and toilet paper. And customers come from miles around to spend their punts, often stopping by for a haircut while they're here.
Oh yeah, I definitely picked up a lot of people coming from across the border, from Belfast especially, a lot of Antrim people coming down from Antrim, spending their punts in Clonus. I have a lot of guys from Antrim in, getting a haircut and paying me in a little bit of punt. It's great, it's help.
There's an estimated 285 million punts tucked away in drawers and under mattresses, forgotten about or kept as souvenirs when Ireland joined the euro a decade ago. They're no longer legal tender, but would have a value of around 240 million euros, just a fraction of which would make a massive difference in crisis-hit Clonus.
The punt scheme has undoubtedly boosted the local economy, but the ravages of the economic crash are still all too evident. The main street is lined with boarded up shops, with around 50% of premises empty. It's a scene that's repeated in small towns and bigger cities throughout Ireland.
Austerity here means business people are being hit with a variety of taxes and levies, making it harder and harder to stay afloat, let alone turn a profit.
It's not just Clonus Town, it's the whole country has suffered with the austerity measures, with the new water charges which are coming in shortly, new household charge which came in this year and will increase every year. There was a 2% hike up to 23% in the point of sale tax. We have to do something to improve the situation.
Shopkeepers say going back to the punt isn't a political statement, it's a survival tactic. And as the fate of the euro hangs in the balance, Clonus may not be alone in looking back for its future. Laura Smith, RT, Clonus, Ireland.
Good. Okay, we see the answer. There's the short-term fix. This is something to keep in mind too for post-collapse. We'll have all this paper dollars, maybe a lot of it will be worthless or whatever, but we can build our own economy. We don't need them. You can do it yourself. They've done it themselves, and look, they're prospering. And we may face a Waterloo where we have to do it ourselves too. There is hope. And that's one of the things we do. We just do it ourselves. one of the big conspiracy angles about this is when they sell a lot of these bonds, they sell them sometimes in something called the secondary debt market. And that's why sometimes it's so important to read all this material, no matter how dry it is, right down to the finest point, because this just hits you in the head like a sledgehammer. It's a mystery why the EFSF, the European Financial Stability Facility, was allowed almost a year ago to undertake secondary market interventions, and governments have not yet chosen to use that possibility. So they were selling these bonds on the secondary market before, a year before. Very strange. Silvio Berlusconi, I guess we have to love him for something because he has a good comment. He said, the prospect of Italy quitting the euro was not blasphemy. He failed to understand why it would hurt Italy's economy. So even though Bunga Bunga Man may be a difficult guy to deal with, it isn't blasphemy. It's only blasphemy to these globalists because they want to take over the world. They have to have more and better, and they'll do whatever damage they can to get it. Italy's fine being Italy, Germany's fine being Germany, Greece is fine being Greece. We don't have to be this monolithic structure that defies the laws of economic basics. The economy of scale can't work. Einstein said problems cannot be solved by the same level of thinking that created them. And the only people meeting in Europe right now to talk about this are the people who created all these problems. They have no idea what to do to solve them, except keep doing the same thing, getting more debt, transferring the debt from one hand to another hand, playing musical chairs with the debt, but all the time it's more and more debt. So Einstein also said insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Bang on! We have a debt problem. Stop borrowing the money. Start creating money, as nation states have a right, a duty, and an obligation to do. Debt-free, tax-free money. Debt is the drug that we are dying from. Angela Merkel at least said one thing: over her dead body will Germany take on the debts of these other countries, because once Germany signs on and says that we'll basically cover all your debts, all these other countries are going to go back and borrow and borrow and borrow because they don't have to pay it back. Germany's going to do it. So there's a reward for doing the wrong thing. Jennifer Lee of BMO Nesbitt Burns: the painful and ongoing problems in Europe continue to be felt around the world, and there is no quick fix. See, there's where she's wrong, because she's part of the people who created it. Create your own currencies. We're out of it. We're free. Just like that. A small little village in Ireland can do it. Why can't we do it on a national basis? So Herman Van Rompuy, the head honcho at the European Union, always comes out, they need more power, more Europe. It reminds me of Star Trek. And they're always having trouble sometimes with the engine, and the captain will call down to Scotty in the engine room, more power, more power. And Scotty would reply, if he was at one of these European Union meetings, but the economic engine cannot take the strain, Captain. And that's quite correct. It can't. We have to do things for ourselves. Everything that they do costs money. You're going to a third party to borrow money. It's like going to a fine restaurant every day for dinner. Sometimes you can't afford to go to the Royal York Hotel here in Toronto for every meal. Sometimes you got to go into your own kitchen, get out your own pot, put it on the stove, and cook your food. It's way cheaper, especially if you have to borrow the money on credit. The comments of the Governor of the Bank of England, Sir Mervyn King, it's not just that he's pessimistic about what's going to happen. He's struck by the situation and how it has changed in the past 6 weeks. The worsening situation in Asia and emerging markets. The government borrowed more than expected in May. Excluding financial interventions such as bank bailouts, they borrowed $17.9 billion compared to $15.2 billion in May of last year. And then income tax receipts have fallen by 7% because of this pressure on people. They've been robbing from the Royal Mail Pension Fund and transferring it to general revenues. They don't tell you that. These pensioners will find out, I imagine. The recession is biting at tax revenues. The economic crisis had continued longer than he had expected. Well, I guess Einstein was right. He's still part of the people who love this solution. 2 years ago, we have seen the situation in the euro area get worse, and the problem is being pushed down the road. And this is still being pushed down by the road. I have no idea what's going to happen to the euro area. So if you're on a plane or a ship and the pilot, the captain, I have no idea what to do with these controls. Do you feel safe there? He'd be feeling prepared to cut interest rates further. There's a blog on, or an article on InfoWars saying they want to go to 0 or below 0%. So the big thing is we're rewarding bad behavior and punishing good behavior. People save their money, they get 0 interest. That's good behavior. We get assets piled up. We punish people for that. And then we reward people by giving low credit so you can borrow tons of money you can never pay back. As I said before, you can't live on borrowed dreams, one of my dad's favorite sayings. The lower the interest rate, the more money goes to the sharks for predatory investment. But one thing I can also recommend as a little fix for you, for your lifeboat, a lot of people may have a decent low interest rate line of credit or something. Maybe you don't have any assets to get any money out, but maybe it's time to get a few bucks, take it out of the bank at a very low interest rate. Don't spend it, just keep it in case there is a bank holiday or something goes wrong, that you have funds at your disposal to do what you need to do. Don't get caught like that lady in Italy with 20 euros. Have a couple $1,000 around just in case, because if this does get nasty, there's no place to go. There's no debt cards, or those debit cards, no credit cards, no lines of credit, no access to the bank. You can't get on the internet. The bank machines don't work. This is happening in Britain with NatWest and Royal Bank of Scotland. It's 10, 11 days now, going into 12 days. No money. People stranded in other countries. No money. Can't sell a house. Can't complete the transfer. No money. Can't go on your honeymoon. Just got married, was going to get on the plane. All my cards don't work all of a sudden. No money. Just like that. There'll be no warning. Prepare yourselves now. Stock up on what you can stock up on, but one of the things to have is maybe a little bit of cash on hand. Don't depend on the green machine. You be the green machine. And one of the worst ones was an executive from the Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. And I knew it was important because this ended up on our local 680 News All Talk 24-hour radio station late at night, but it was out there. And I even knew that they even mentioned the Bank of International Settlements before, which is a central bank to the central banks. They say they're caught in the middle. They're forced to be the policy makers of last resort because our leaders are completely inept and incapable of doing it. They're providing monetary stimulus on a massive scale, supplying liquidity to banks unable to fund themselves. The worry is that a monetary policy would be pressured to do still more because not enough action has been taken in other areas. From Beijing, Frankfurt, Washington, they come under renewed pressure to step up efforts to resuscitate the slowing global economy. It now lies with government deficit cutting and policy changes, and may be elected politicians. Good luck. Prolonged monetary stimulus might make structural or fiscal adjustments seem less urgent, unable to earn high returns and thus shift to riskier investments, which is some of the things we were saying. You get like 0% interest in your bank, you give these people money to go to the casino. The ability of central banks to control inflation would at some point be seriously compromised. Controlling inflation, seriously compromised. Why? Because Mervyn King's given them a blank check. He's going to print money to hell and back again. Stronger economies are too dependent on exports. They should reorient their economies to rely more on domestic demand. And that's the whole point of globalization and free trade, was that we have to send everything offshore. We don't have a market in our own country. You were laughed at. Oh, you're a nationalist, an isolationist, an idiot. And here's the guy, the top dog, the Bank of International Settlements, saying, we may have to do that. Maybe we should have never stopped doing that. And then, of course, he gets into the global mantra again of bigger Europe, something that can't work. Einstein, again, is right. The people who created the problems can't solve them. NatWest shed 30,000 jobs since it got a taxpayer bailout in 2007, including 20,000 UK positions. They offshored to India. They run the data. And now they say they have a computer glitch and the banks are finished. They haven't got any money to give out. That includes Royal Bank of Scotland too. So then we have to wonder, what are we dealing with? So a nice little rant here, short one. An Illinois representative on the House floor says it quite nicely. Can we switch to that?
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. We can start them over at the beginning here.
Go ahead.
Not the American way. These damn bills that come out here all the damn time come out here at the last second, and I gotta try to figure out how to vote for my people. How ashamed of are you? You should be ashamed of yourselves. I'm sick of it. Every year we give power to one person. It was not made that way in the Constitution. He was around when it was written. Now we pass rules that stop each one of us. Enough! I feel like somebody trying to be released from Egypt. Let my people go! My God, they sent me here to vote for them. They sent me here to vote for them, to argue for them. But I'm trapped. I'm trapped by rules that have been forced down our throats. Folks, we live in a democracy, but not here. But not here. So you go back and you tell your people, I'd like to do that, but the Speaker has so much power, so much control. And each one of us do it in their districts. And have to go back and say that. And you can say on your side of the aisle, oh, no, that's not the case. But yes, you do. All of us know you got to deal with it. When's it going to stop?
You gotta like that. You gotta like that guy. When's it gonna stop? When's it gonna stop? When everybody jumps up and down like that. That's when it's gonna stop. If you're sitting at the back of the bus and the bus is going off the cliff, you're going off the cliff. You start screaming and yelling a little bit, go to the front of the bus, maybe we can alter the course a little bit. And that's why we come here, and that's why we do what we do. MI5 was saying there's an astonishing level of cyber attacks. And maybe these banks, NatWest and Royal Bank of Scotland, have been hit with cyber attacks. Maybe Iran's fighting back. And they sent a little virus to say, sanction this. Don't know how to say asshole in Farsi. And you're stuck with it. And you don't even know what hit you. They just sit back. Stuxnet. Flame. Well, we figured it out. But the head of MI5, Jonathan Evans, says he's concerned about industrial scale processes involving many thousands of people lying both behind state-sponsored and organized crime, cyber terrorism or cyber crime. He said the extent going on is astonishing. The threat to integrity, confidentiality, and the availability of government information, business and academic institutions, they're all at risk, all at threat because of this. Government secrets are also at threat. Well, we could use a few government secrets. Maybe we can straighten out the game. Commercial sensitive information. They have a clock at the entrance to Thames House, MI5 headquarters, counting down to the opening of the Olympics, because I guess that's their big plot to change the world. So he's worried about the dogs that don't bark. The dog you haven't seen may be the one that bites you. One of the biggest reasons why they can't see, of course, is because they are blind. They are blind and they can't even realize what a false flag attack is or what evil even exerts itself from the inside. If there's truth to this Group 4 Securicor or a military plot to attack London for these Olympics. They can't see it because they're blind. That's almost like the analogy of these 3 guards who were shot by their colleague at Group 4 Securicor at the University of Alberta. They couldn't conceive for a moment that the people around them were robbers. I worked in the armored car industry. I had people look at me like, you know, you're a pretty girl or something like that. You know, a guy comes by with the leering eyes. Where people look at you and they just go, look at all that money, and there's only one guy standing in front of them. Well, you see that, if you got eyes to see. And I'd be quick to tell some of these turkeys, hey pal, if you got any ideas, there's not too many places for you to go. You turn up on a beach in, you know, the Philippines or Belize or another place where there's no extradition treaties with a couple of big bags of money, and you're the only white guy on the beach, it's not going to take too long for the local police to realize that, hey, gringo, you work for the armored car company. They had the big robbery. Ooh. We put boiling water up gringo's ass until he gives us the money. Now you're stuck there with no money. You can't come home. So now it doesn't look like so much fun anymore. So maybe if one of those guards picked up on their colleague and say, hey, you only get to hold that money for 24 hours and then you go to jail for 25 years to be somebody's love child. Well, you know what? Maybe I won't rob and kill my colleagues today. It's not such a great idea. But this cyber war, these cyber attacks are very, very important. We have a bulletin from the atomic scientists to say that they are very, very concerned about this. So they've gone to the government, they've gone to the press, the Bulletin of American Atomic Scientists, to say that these things that they've invented, Stuxnet and Flame, were engineered in the same lab. They're one of 5 viruses. 3 have not been used yet. Their roots go back to 2007, when Obama came into power. Of course, this was a Bush operation, codenamed Olympic Games. Olympic Games. Olympic Games. 3 have not been released yet. Or maybe the 3rd was released, and that's why the British banks are going down. What they're worried about is not just that they can destroy the banking sector, hint, hint, could eliminate the stock market, cause flooding from a dam, poison a water supply, all initiated by malicious software. And once these things get out, they have no control over them or where they go. And that's why I loved an old film once called Sneakers. That it's a must-see. Same thing, it's copyrighted. I can't get the whole thing, I don't think, to put on the website. But it just shows you how these guys steal some software. Probably the Promise software, long before we knew what Promise software was. One of the actors in the film died mysteriously. Very young man outside of a club somewhere. Robert Redford was in the movie. He's done a lot of great movies like that. But it just shows you at what level we operate on. And then I guess we can end the show with some comments here from Israel. And then we'll be making a hasty exit because it is getting late. So let's switch to their final words of wisdom about Iran talks and how they'll up the ante if they have to.
Now, crucial talks are underway here in Moscow to try to break the long-running stalemate over Iran's nuclear program. Tehran is meeting the group of 6 world powers as Europe and the US prepare to slap their toughest sanctions to date on the Islamic Republic. RT's Lucy Kafanoff is now joining us with the latest. Good to see you, Lucy. Anything yet coming out of the talks that we know of?
Well, of course, it is the first day of the 3rd round of negotiations between the 5 permanent members of the UN Security Council, plus Germany and Iran, as officials scramble to try to find some sort of diplomatic agreement on Iran's nuclear ambitions and avert a potential new war in the Middle East. Now, what we've heard from the Iranians today is a reiteration of their position that they want an acknowledgement of their right to enrich uranium for civilian nuclear purposes. And President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad seemed to indicate on his website that Iran would be willing to halt high-level uranium enrichment if the world powers agreed to meet its need for the fuel. Now, the Iranians are also hoping that the West will scale back its sanctions, which are, of course, significantly hurting oil exports and the Iranian economy. But the message from the European Union today was that the planned embargo against Iranian oil will continue in less than 2 weeks. This, of course, in addition to American banking sanctions. Now, the West, meanwhile, is holding tight to its position that it came to in last month's meeting in Baghdad, where they're demanding the Iranians halt uranium enrichment above 20 or at 20%, which is close to weapons grade, which again Iran insists is for civilian purposes only, and also ship some of that stockpile out of the country. In exchange, the West would give Iran some medical supplies for its research reactor, as well as spare parts for its airliner commercial fleet, a deal that the Iranians to date have not said is fair, has said it's unbalanced. In the words of one former Iranian negotiator, diamonds for peanuts. So a difficult situation thus far.
And Lucia, ultimately the inevitable question is, if this round of talks fails, what's next?
Well, it really could be potentially devastating. Some countries are indicating that this is the last chance for diplomacy before talk turns to war. We heard Israel threaten again to attack Iran should these talks fail. The Israeli president today, in fact, said that Iran is running out of time, and if things continue on its current course, war would be the option. And we have to keep in mind here that the U.S. president is running a tough re-election campaign and is under some serious pressure from the U.S. Congress to consider the military option should there not be a breakthrough in these talks. But again, it's only day one. The talks are continuing, and we will keep you updated, of course, as things progress.
Indeed, hoping for perhaps some further developments tomorrow on day 2 of the talks. RT's Lucy Kafanov in central Moscow. Thank you.
Okay, the world is at crisis. We're at the switch. Conspiracy Cafe, homed here at That Channel in downtown Toronto. On a hot and sweaty night, we're here, rolling out the punches, telling you what's going to happen, giving you some good advice on how to survive the storm. You can survive the storm. You will survive the storm. And the reason you do is because you know how and you have faith. Keep lots of faith. Say your prayers. Come back to us again. We'll be here Tuesday night next week, starting a new month, getting a little closer to the knockdown day with the Olympics. We'll see what's going to jive. Maybe we've said enough. Maybe combined, a lot of people have said enough to make Dr. Frankenstein go back into his cage. But there's one thing you can be sure of. We don't pull our punches here. Conspiracy Cafe, That Channel, the place to be. We wish you a good night, but we also ask you humbly, too, to support this station as best you can. If you do it through the PayPal account, send something here to the studio that's cashable in Canada. We'll take that. Western Union works and things like that. If you get in touch with us, we've done transfers like that from Europe, and that paid for a good part of this month's shows, and we thank our contributor there for really being helpful. The NYPD is ponied up for next month to lay a little cash in our hands while it's still available. So there's nothing like it. This is the place. We thank you for coming out. We thank That Channel and all the staff for putting up with us and doing all the work they do, because it's a lot of hard, dedicated work. Aaron and Randy and Hugh, they do a great job here at That Channel. This is a place that you should be recommending to your friends for all kinds of things, especially if you need services like any kind of video production. Helps pay the rent. Anyway, good night. See you next week. Thanks for coming out.